Oh, this is going to be an interesting discussion tonight in the kitchen. In fact, it was so good while it was going on. I said, Douglas, stop right there and let's go record this. Now, John Barnwell has been a lifelong friend of, not lifelong, longtime friend of Douglas's. And the two of them did a video the other day on John Barnwell 888 site. It was just a casual 30-minute conversation about some of the things that Douglas and John had experienced living here in Detroit. Just stories, but it got a lot of hits. And so we thought, well, maybe people would like to know a little bit more. So today or yesterday, they did an hour and a half. Only today did I listen to it, and it was really good. And I have to say, I enjoyed it so much because I've heard these stories before, but to have John chime in and also agree. Oh, there's Douglas walking in right now. I'm just getting started. Is that okay, hon?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, but when I would listen to John confirm the stories or even add to it, I mean, the two of them talking together, it's really exciting. Now, if you look in the comments below, I'll leave the link to that video. But I was telling Douglas, I think what I want to do, because I know these stories. I mean, there are some amazing stories that Douglas hasn't even begun to tell you guys. I think what I'm going to do is take one of our blog pages on neoanthroposophy.com and start organizing these videos as they're released, but also include pictures of the places in Detroit and the people that they're talking about, so you get an even deeper flavor of what's going on. But as we were talking, I said, Douglas, what should we call the series? And when he gave me the title, I'm like, I was blown away because, of course, that's what you have been doing as a former Jesuit exorcist for the last almost 7-8 years since we've been on the internet. Douglas has been, well, let you tell the story.
Well, that's a long story. And I wasn't a Jesuit exorcist. I was a Benedictine at the time, and my boss was a Benedictine.
Well, it's hard to keep everything straight, even for me. You are an exorcist.
I was trained as an exorcist from age 14 to 18.
And for the last few years, what you've really been doing is exorcising the demons in our world. I mean, we started in the spiritual, then we went into the geopolitical, which we kind of dabble in still today. And now we're moving into the spiritual. Could we say that you are a global exorcist?
Yes, matter of fact, that was my intention long before I even came to anthroposophy, was I could see that materialism was eating people alive, and that what we needed to do was figure out the way that materialism was doing this and take the people who've become possessed, and they don't even know they're possessed, and do an exorcism on them. Well, that's what Star Wars was. That's what Indiana Jones stories. All those Indiana Jones stories are about me.
Okay, before you do that, tell them the story of Father Brishnikov and what you did as a young man with him.
Okay, Father Breshnikov was the head abbot of Conception Abbey, the largest house of diocesan priest formation in the country. Well, it's a very strange story. This could fill the whole thing. Some of this is not clear and only became clear at my mother's funeral, as a matter of fact, when I was then told some things that I had never known. I had suspected, but I didn't know for a fact. As a matter of fact, there's some strange association with my mother and the priest who married them, my mom and dad, who my dad wasn't my real dad, because I was a bastard, fourth child, with a man that my mother had known before, and she had broken up with my father, and for 2 years they were separated. So here I am born. I'm being...
Sorry, you are a love child, so stop that.
Oh, sorry.
It was your mother's greatest love.
That's right. So at my baptism, first off, my father wasn't even around when I was born because he was so upset, of course, that my mother was pregnant. But anyway, at my baptism, this Father William Breshnikov, who had not contracted polio at that time, he was still in his diocesan placement in his, he was there to help because it was a very special church. St. Joseph's Church in Springfield, Missouri, had the statue of Mary that eyes bled tears. I mean, tears of blood, sorry. and they were examined, and they were human. It was human blood, and so we would go to this church, which was my favorite church. And outside was this statue, and it started bleeding, not just tears like some of them do, but blood. And so they tested the blood, and the blood was human. So they literally took down the statue and hid it somewhere. But in this church, from a youth, I saw the angels, and it was the most sacred, holy place I knew. Well, the priest who actually baptized me was Father William Bresnahoff. And then later he became the head exorcist and the head priest for religious formation in the country. Then he got polio. And then we moved away. And when I was 14, I came back to that town, Springfield, Missouri. And he wheels into the room in my dad's room in the hospital. And he's in a wheelchair, and he's a funny looking guy. But he looks like he's an angel, some kind of sprightly angel or something. The most incredible infectious laugh and humor I've ever seen in a human being. He was my first really, really important teacher. And so he wheels into the room and he says, Bruce, Gary, David, Doug, Judge. He names all of us with our middle names, looks at each one of us and greets us and says to John and Dorothy, well, and then they're my father's
parents.
Yeah, my parents, their jaws are open, looking at him going, who are you? How could you possibly know all our children's names? We can't remember all their names. Who are you? And he goes, well, don't you remember? I'm here to collect Douglas, who you promised to the church at the baptism. Remember, I baptized him. And they're like, what? And they said, don't you remember? I gave you the St. Jude novena to do, and you prayed to get a job because you were so poor at the time that you had to work 3 different jobs. So anyway, they named me Douglas Jude Gabriel after St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless causes. Upon Father Bresnahoff's recommendation, my dad got a job immediately and kept it for the rest of the time that he worked. So here he is. My dad's coming back to work in Springfield. Here comes Father William Bresnahoff. He wheels in and he basically says, and I'm so shocked, he says, I've come to collect him for the church. He's mine. You gave him up at baptism. And my parents looked at each other. They finally realized what he said was 100% true. And then when my mother realized who he was, she was so shocked she couldn't say a word and didn't say a word. And none of my family ever said a word about any of this, okay? So from that point on, I was with him every single day, pushing him around, taking him to people who were so sick and the painkillers wouldn't stop the pain. But if he'd whisper in their ear a certain prayer, they'd go to sleep. So he taught me all these things on how to heal people that way. But then we worked in the largest psychiatric ward in Missouri. And we had more people who came in who were possessed. And anytime someone was anywhere near him, we would go out and go to the place, and he trained me in exorcisms because he was the very priest who the movie The Exorcist was written about, but the story was all garbled up. He had films, audios, articles that were written by all the people who witnessed it. So he had all this documentation. And so for years, he trained me in this, as well as he gave me, because he was able to, the 4 years of religious formation, which ends up giving you a bachelor's. Really, it's a master's degree in formation. So by the time I graduated high school, I had a degree in formation, a degree in computers, and I just wanted to get away from there. So I left, and I was drafted. So I went to the military, and that's how I got in the NSA. But yes, I was trained as an exorcist, and oftentimes they would use me because I was more mobile after that. And then I continued to do it for a long time. After I got out of the military, I went back into the Catholic Church as a Trappist monk. And they would call on me to say, well, can you go look at this particular manifestation and tell us if it's real or whatever? So I did that for many, many years and came across situations, every time there was an angel seen by someone, every time there was some possession, every time there was a whole group of people that came to watch a statue bleed or a statue cry, I would go there and check it out. So that's the reason I've had so much experience at this. But I could see at that point, and Father William Bresnahoff certainly taught me this, We had to diffuse the materialism that was taking people away from spiritual experiences and get them back into the spiritual experiences. So he was kind of radical at the time. As you might remember, the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar was out, and it was forbidden by the church. It was condemned by the church. He and I would sing every word to it. So we memorized the word, and he taught me how to use my memory like he could. And he never referenced a book and could reference anything he ever read. And he also taught me in this beautiful, beautiful chapel. It was in St. John's Hospital in Springfield, Missouri. One of the most beautiful chapels I've ever been in. And I said mass with him there because he was in the wheelchair. I had to hold up the host and the chalice and stuff. And so I was given extraordinary ordination at age 14, trained with him for 4 years, and then went into the military.
Okay. All right. Those are a lot of details. But the point is, you at 14 years old, you were conducting exorcisms. Now, once you are able to do that, did you ever stop? The answer would be no, because you started exorcising things in your world environment. And then when we started the work that we're doing on the internet, I mean, aren't you exorcising the demons that are just layer upon layer here on the earth?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, the Catholic Church will tell you that, well, first off, Father William Bresnahoff there's only at that time 3 exorcists in America, and he was in the middle of the country, and he was the most experienced, so he was the leader. So he was training me to go to Rome, to be at the Vatican, to be an understudy to the Vatican's chief exorcist, because I was used in so many cases effectively because I was just a child. I didn't know anything about anything. I'd never sworn a single cuss word. I didn't know anything about sex, nothing about drugs, alcohol. I was completely innocent. And that's what you have to be to participate in the exorcism, or that spirit will rebound on you and can cause actually death if you're not careful. But right now, the Vatican says every single diocesan priest, every single Catholic priest, and every church is now being given the sanction to do exorcisms, even with your whole church, all the people in the church.
Yeah, but you've told me that if a priest who isn't holy, who has committed sin, conducts an exorcism, it's like doing the reverse work. So what is he doing? Is he laying down more demons into the congregation?
Unfortunately, it can happen that way if there isn't a pure priest. Let's take the chief exorcist in the Vatican right now. He's so proud of the exorcisms he's done where the supposed nails of Christ that nailed Christ to the cross pop out of the mouth of someone that's possessed. And he's trying to get that to happen. That's what he does. It's his supposed specialty. That is all fake. He is demon possessed. Make no mistake about it. The head exorcist in the Catholic Church is demon possessed. I guarantee you. And I know that from before I lost a lot of my clairvoyance because of the illness that I have. But it's coming back, as John always likes to say. It's coming back. It happens all the time. Well, it's coming back. My wife is now so clairvoyant. It's ridiculous. I don't seem to have a thought of my own that she hasn't thought. But anyway, the point is, yes, the world needs an exorcism. Why? Because the spirit of Ahriman, the spirit of lies, the spirit of darkness, Satan, has entered into our way of life and made us completely unconscious and completely unaware of the fact that we are living in a spiritual cosmos, and that every single moment we can have a contact with the spiritual world. But in fact, we now live in a society in the West where that is completely abnegated. It's completely poo-pooed. People say, no, it can't happen. It won't happen. And so now we have literally an entire Western culture that claims that they might be Catholic and go to church or Christian or whatever, but they've never had spiritual experiences. So what is it they're getting out of their religion? So in my opinion, like Rudolf Steiner says, I agree with him, that we are a church of one. We must find our own North Star. We must develop our own religion. And when we do, you need to get results. I always talk about this with the Tibetans. No Tibetan can be a High Lama or a Geshe or a Rinpoche unless they're clairvoyant. They literally have had to climb up the ladder of clairvoyance, and other clairvoyants know if they are. That's the reason they always, when they see me, They swear they know who I am, and they treat me like I'm their brother.
Okay, now you can go back to the Star Wars reference. How was that an exorcism?
Well, first off, George Lucas's first two treatments on Star Wars were so bad that they weren't possessed, but they were just stupid materialism, beyond stupid materialism. They were like taking stupid materialism into the cosmos. It was like what he needed to do. And it always comes down to when you're very limited, you're looking for rocks. In this case, what I named Kyber crystals, but he had another name for it. So he's looking for crystals. So you get a crystal, and by golly, all of a sudden you're spiritual. Now, is that pure materialism or what? Yes, crystals can tap you into the spirit, but only if you're already tapped into the spirit. So that's not going to help. So Star Wars was written when Marcia Lucas gave me the first two treatments and I read them. I said, well, this is complete and absolute garbage. I really can't help this story. I would have to change it. And she says, well, what would you change it to? And I'd say I'd change it from a child's space fairy tale, or just really, it wasn't even a fairy tale. It didn't have any of the elements of a fairy tale, but it was supposed to be a children's space musical with very little dialogue, and the character development was nil. So I basically said, well, first off, this is interesting. George Lucas already got an Oscar for American Graffiti, so he has an audience. And this was one of the largest studios that gave him these two contracts. I thought, well, let's see if we can't put something spiritual on the screen. So I'm sitting there with my teacher, Werner Glass, Hans Gabriel, Marcia Lucas, and two other students who literally did nothing and didn't even come on day 2 and 3. And basically, when we talked about this for just a minute, they said, I said, this is what I would suggest. We need to bring the spirit to the silver screen. We need to bring a spiritual fairy tale with the proper elements of a fairy tale, out of space and time, beyond space and time, with a moral that is based upon reality. And they said, oh, well, looks like you have this under control, Doug. We're out of here. So my bosses got up and left. And then Marcia Lucas said, just tell me what you want me to do. And so I started off literally with the phrase that you saw scrolling across the screen. I wrote that. And then Darth Vader is the exorcism. Darth Vader is in all of us. And right now, transhumanism has put so much graphene oxide on it. They're trying to create an extra human being inside of you made out of nanobots. That's what's happening. And that is the purest possession of evil that there is on the face of the earth right now. Human beings won't be able to have a spiritual thought because they will have become who? Darth Vader. Half man, half machine, no heart, pure evil, wants violence, death, and to control the world so that he can be, of course, the Luciferic one ego controller of the world with hegemony. So that's why I depicted him that way. And there were 3 aspects: thinking, feeling, and willing. That's the 3 major characters. And in the original story, Princess Leia was supposed to just be some girl he meets and marries. No, wrong. Had to be the twin. Had to be the twin, the male and the female. Without the male and the female in today's age, you can't do anything. That's why.
Back to the exorcism part.
Oh, well, that's why in the exorcism, I had to be there with him because my poor guy, I don't mean to besmirch him. He's in the spiritual world now, but the reason he's told everyone he got polio. That is not how it happened. And he never would admit this to me. When he was doing the exorcism that went into the movie, he was foolish enough to leave the convent that this child was in, this girl was in, and she would scream so loud, and it went on for so long. And it was all filmed, by the way. It was filmed, it was recorded, and they actually took the substance that she threw up. They could not analyze it. There wasn't anything on the face of the earth that they knew of. Okay? So, and all these nuns were there to help. Well, Father William, I wasn't there for that, of course. He was doing it by himself, right? And because he had a moral problem. I'm not going to go into the moral problem, but it's the same moral problem most priests.
Priests and a moral problem. Yeah, okay.
You can't imagine what I'm talking about, can you? But anyway, so he had that moral problem, right? So during the exorcism, it rebounded on him, and he was attacked multiple times when he left this convent. He had to drive down a kind of a mountainside. As he drove down the mountainside, his car was literally pushed off the road. It fell all the way down, rolled all the way over until it landed on the lower part of the road, and he survived. And then he had attacks against him. He had these horrible things I'm not even going to describe because they're so horrible. But in the end, he became paralyzed while he was doing it. And then they had to call in the other exorcists. And then after a very long time, they were basically able to get the 3 names of the demons who lived in this child, who was the child that invited them into their body. By the way, that's the way it usually happens. We as materialists invite materialism into our body to kill our spirit. And so once you get that information, you use certain things to get rid of the being.
Okay, people, you can go see the movies. You can go see The Exorcist, and you'll see Douglas's handprint all over it. And you go see Star Wars. Oh, and add Indiana Jones. So that's part of your story. But now I want to lock you down on what the work you're doing now is form of a global exorcism. And then I also want to talk about the uniqueness of Detroit, Michigan. People maybe are not aware that it is an incredible spiritual hub, and it has been for many decades. Usually people think it's out in LA or someplace here in New York. No, it's Detroit. And it's because Detroit was the manufacturing hub. You look at even Henry Ford and the spiritualism that he was involved in. And there was a lot of money made up here in Oakland County and in the suburbs of Detroit. And when the wealthy have earned as much money as they can, they're trying to find a way for their own immortality. And, some may choose mechanical ways to try to do it. But another path is through spiritual, let's just call it spiritualism. And Douglas was right in the thick with a lot of amazing, important people. Don't go into them right now in this thing, because that will be another 3 hours. But they had the money to pull and to draw in all this amazing spiritual talent, which brought in even more people. I mean, when I moved here from Florida up to Michigan, I did so because I began to see the amazing things that were happening for people who are trying to awaken, to arouse themselves out of the materialism and to awaken into a more spiritual way of life. Okay, so let's go back to how you are exercising the world through geopolitics.
Well, when we wrote the book Gospel Sophia, that is a modern path of initiation that if you follow it, which is a self-initiatory path, you will get rid of any kind of beings of materialism that are ruling over you. But also, it was anthroposophy. So you see, as a Jesuit, when I left the Jesuits, well, actually, I hadn't left yet, they said, you always get to be an expert. You have to be an expert in one area or the other. So I was going to be and was the expert in anthroposophy, and I had to go live with the top dog, who was a Jesuit, who was also undercover working in the anthroposophical community in New York, Spring Valley, New York. And he basically had taken over the community. You couldn't get in the community if you couldn't get by the Jesuit.
Everybody's going to want to know his name. Is he dead yet? So you can say his name?
I don't know if he's dead.
Okay.
But they will want to know. And if they've ever been to Spring Valley, I'm going to give you the initials. CS. And you will know exactly who I'm talking about, because you couldn't do anything in Spring Valley without CS's permission. Okay. And so I went there because I was assigned to him after I was already assigned to another guy.
And he was a Jesuit.
He was a Jesuit, undercover. And he was probably the most dyed-in-the-wool anthroposophist that I ever met. He was, Jesuits are very intense. They're so intelligent. And so he wasn't a spiritual guy. Okay. But he knew everything that Rudolf Steiner ever wrote, because he had the biggest library in English right there in the Spring Valley auditorium, which had a big library, which I became the librarian of, as a matter of fact. So I went there and met him and was working with him. And I said, okay, this is terrible. Look at this. Anthroposophy is filled with a bunch of evil. What is going on? I mean, I'm talking to a Jesuit who's in charge of the major place in America. And so I said, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this. I'm going to go to Adelphi University. Strangely enough, I wrote to John Gardner, went there, and at like 2 days before I got there, the whole thing exploded and died. So I said, oh, that's bad. So I'll go to the other place. I'll go out to Sacramento, and went out there. Literally the day we started, I could say his name too. Let's just say Mr. Franklin was there. He was supposed to start teaching. He was the head of the teacher training. He didn't show up. They came in and announced he ran away with the secretary. And I'm going, oh, Lord, anthroposophy is just filled with stupid evil, unconscious and conscious evil. I ended up in Detroit because it was the only place that there was a place I could get a degree in it, because I wanted to do college because I had money from being in the military. And so I wanted to go to school again. So I went to Mercy College and then later to a Jesuit university here and got degrees and so on and so forth. So what happened after that? I saw that in anthroposophy were some of the worst enemies of anthroposophy. And so I went on a war. And recently, once we did the Gospel of Sophia, I went on to the internet, wasn't on it before, got on Facebook, and went on every anthroposophic site that there was that said anthroposophy in the study.
Slaying the trolls. It was a mighty thing to see.
It was unbelievable. For years, those sites were not filled with anything spiritual. They were filled with the worst form of spiritual materialism and bastardizations of anthroposophy I'd ever seen. You know, like Sotomayor and these people who say Steiner is a racist because they don't understand a single thing about anthroposophy. So I got into a war with them. And that was literally, I exorcised them. Some of them literally went crazy and ended up in psych wards because I told them what their real problem was from a distance. So yes, you can even begin an exorcism on the internet.
Yeah. And so for me, the motivating factor I said, Doug, we've got to get on the internet. We have to correct this. You wouldn't believe the misinformation out there about anthroposophy. There was this guy, what was his name? Something Went. Joel, sorry, Joel, but I have to be honest here. You really prompted me to get onto YouTube, because when I would Google or search on YouTube for anthroposophy, it was Joel Went talking about it with a monkey. He had a monkey on the bookshelf, and it was just so bizarre. And so I knew Douglas could explain it so much better. And that's why we did what we did, to correct the record for Rudolf Steiner.
Well, since you already said his name, and since anyone can go on and get his stuff on the internet and follow his son, who's taken up the banner, I will say point blank, in my opinion, I didn't say humble opinion, in my opinion, Joel Went is a perfect example of Luciferic possession, just like Robert Powell is, just like Tomberg was.
Oh, and that was the other thing. Robert Powell, he was just so far out there, and everyone was seeing him as the leader of anthroposophy. Oh, yeah.
They thought he was, Steiner said, Tycho de Brahe would reincarnate and give all answers to anthroposophy at the turn of the millennium. And he thinks he's it. No, everything he says is wrong. Okay. And I've been fighting this guy face to face. I went in his organization, got to the deepest levels of that, found out what was really going on. And then face to face, I squared off with him and Estelle Isaacson, and basically said, you all are possessed. You have nothing to do with the being of Sophia.
Not to mention Judith von Halle over in Dornach, and how that has just ripped the international organization all to shreds.
She is one of the worst, and she is so luciferically possessed, but she is now become so harmonically eaten up by the Asuras that she has all of the richest anthroposophists believing her garbage. And her garbage is the opposite of Rudolf Steiner. But she's in Dornach, Switzerland. The head of the Anthroposophic Society is there. And she's down the hill in a wood shop, like Steiner had a wood shop. And she's trying to replicate Steiner, and she is completely wrong. I can tell you, please, do not waste a single penny on her books. Do not listen to anything she or any of her followers say. Her follower that got her onto this nonsense was Trudowski. And he wrote a long expose on the way they created this fraud to create a new anthroposophical society to basically kill the old one. And they write about this, and then they now act as if she still has stigmata and anedia. She hasn't eaten, blah, blah, blah. Those are all lies, complete and absolute lies. So you have a lot of these people, but Steiner said in anthroposophy, it would be turned towards evil after 100 years so that it would become obvious to the people who were spiritual that everything Steiner said was right. And the other people would use Steiner for the opposite purposes that Steiner was trying to get across. And that's what we see right now. And so, yes, I'm still on the warpath. And there's anybody who wants to start spouting anthroposophy or spiritual science that I come across is going to get me analyzing them. And I know exactly how to say things to them that will trigger the psychosis that they have, because I learned this as a 14-year-old.
You know what I was really shocked
in.
at is how many anthroposophists that we know here in the Ann Arbor area who were vaccinated. Didn't they read the indications that Steiner gave about vaccinations?
No, well, the leaders of the society are telling people
that doctor of the what is it? One
the
of
head
the
of the medical section
is saying it's okay.
Mikhail Blocker.
Is this? This is crazy.
It's insane. Steiner said there are no viruses, and he clearly never told anybody except one particular case, and throw that case out, because anything you think Steiner said, if you can't find him saying it 3 or 4 times, then it's probably a mistranslation. And so, yes, he did once say that the children in the front of his building, the few, they were going to get the smallpox vaccination anyway. He said, go ahead and get it. That doesn't mean, he said, that what the medical section is saying now, which is pure 100% luciferic, aromonic possession of door knock in the medical section to say that messenger RNA is a good platform to develop viral vectors and vaccines from. That is pure evil. That is killing worse than the body. That's killing the soul and the spirit.
Come on, exercise the society right here, right now.
Well, I've already done this. I've already squared off with all those people, and I've already written so many articles. That's why I write the articles. I'll mention another person. And by the way, I've said this to them online. Nothing I'm saying now. Go get my article on Are There Jesuit Spies in Anthroposophy?
I'll put that in the comment.
Yeah. There's a lot of them. As a matter of fact, they're the ones who lead the society. And the ones who failed their initiation during their Egyptian incarnation, those are the heads of the society. They're the ones who control the money. Now, on the other hand, I've raised more money than all of them.
Okay, let's not go down that road, though.
And I didn't get paid a single penny for it. But the second they get any money, they selfishly hold it and only give it to their family members. And I can name all those people too, because I have had direct fights with them. What I'm telling you, I've already said publicly. So I'll say it once more. Do not listen to Ari Thorensen. He is elementally possessed. What he tells people is the reality that they're going to be elementally possessed is because he is elementally possessed by working with too many of those group souls that have been separated from the animal kingdom that I described not too long ago on one of these. He is possessed by that. And yes, I've told him point blank. And what's he doing now? Oh, he's the number one guy going around to tell everybody the way that it is. And he's 100% wrong. Okay? Everything he says now is wrong. It used to be his first couple books, not bad. They were more historical. Now everything he prints, and they'll print anything he says. Now, mind you, the possessed anthroposophists get printed by the presses.
Of course they do, because it's the whole organization's been taken over and by demons. So that's why we urge you not to be joining the Anthroposophical Society of America or internationally, because it's not the anthroposophy that you want. Now,
well, let me just say this. If they recommend vaccines for children, they're worshiping Moloch, who eats children.
Then we must absolutely reject the Anthroposophical Society as it exists today. We must.
Well, wait.
No, there's no buts about it. If they are advocating vaccines to their membership and now to the children, we don't know that they're doing that.
We know that.
They are doing it with the children.
They said messenger RNA is a good platform.
Pure evil. All right, but.
So there are saints in the Catholic Church. There are very few and far between. There are no psychics who are Jesuits. So to say a Jesuit is psychic or a Jesuit is an exorcist is an oxymoron. Jesuits are evil, aromonic thinkers who wish to rule the world, and through their 27 universities and schools, they basically brainwash.
And the Pope is a Jesuit, for those of you who aren't aware of that.
The Pope
and he's surrounded by Jesuits.
The Pope is pure evil. In my opinion, the Pope is absolutely possessed, not by Lucifer, not by Ahriman, by Soroth and the Asuras.
But he gave his name Francis so that he would seem to be a beloved saint.
That's right.
You know,
when actually he was part of murdering thousands of people when he was in South America. He's a liberation theologist. He is a Jesuit apocalyptic theologist. In other words, he believes that while he's Pope, he needs to bring the end of days and the apocalypse so that the Jesuit vision, all Jesuits have to go through 30 days of silence where they meditate on a certain vision. And the vision is the same vision as the Hebrews have for their Messiah. that Christ will come again on a white horse with a sword to conquer the world, and the whole world will be conquered for Catholicism. That's stupid fundamentalism. Same thing with the fundamentalism of Islam. Same thing with the fundamentalism of the, well, we call them Jews. I have to call them fake Jews at this point. But yeah, it's all the same.
Babylonian Radnites. That's who we
Yes.
found out they are. And they masquerade as Jews and give Hebrew Jews a bad name. But as Douglas points out all the time, there are no 100% pure blood Hebrews anymore. And because of that, they cannot birth the Messiah. So they're on fallacious grounds.
I'm going to tell you a crazy story. Okay, there's the Shrine of the Little Flower in Michigan, and Father Conklin had the first big Catholic radio station that had tremendous viewership, listening group, way back in the 50s.
Is he the one where they found all the dead babies in his backyard?
That's the story I'm going to tell.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So strangely enough, I didn't know this when we had one of my children baptized in that church, because I didn't go to that church.
Which church is it?
The Shrine of the Little Flower.
Is that the one on Woodward?
Yeah, Woodward and 12 Mile.
Oh, yeah. Okay. For the locals, go see it.
Now, the locals came and burned up that church. They came and went after Father Conklin because he was such a radical Catholic that literally he built this gigantic stone tower with a cross on it and with the Holy Grail and the whole thing, so that it cannot be burnt. That's why that's that way. That's why that's an entire stone building, because they had burned up the other ones. But right next to it, there have been visions. I've seen them, and other clairvoyants, we've gone there, and Mother Mary sometimes would come there. What did they do with that? They knocked that down. That's gone, right? So Father Conklin, all right, John Barnwell can verify this for you. There used to be a place called Alligator Alley where everybody played video games, and John and Bob went there all the time.
Florida too.
Yeah,
It was
yeah. You got a real alligators.
It was real alligators.
So I'm in there, and I hate that stuff because it'll possess you. You know, it'll possess you with auromonic control. Those flashing lights actually they hypnotize you. You go into trance, right? And so you become addicted to them. So here, John and Bob, two of the spiritual dudes, right, are playing these games all the time, and I'm like, no, John, I don't want to do this. They said, let's go eat. But, let's stop by Alligator Alley for just a minute. So we're there at Alligator Alley, and I'm walking around, and somebody screams. And I'm going, I look around, and what's that? After a little while, someone else screams bloody murder. I'm not like from the game, right? Because when you're in the game, you're not even in control of your mind. So I go over and say, what's going on? They said, something poked me. And I turned around, and I saw this like monster behind me. And I'm going, oh, weird. And then the people who owned it saw me talking to them, and I went over and said, what's going on? What's happening here? I said, we don't know. We need to get a psychic in here to figure out what's going on, because this goes on all the time and it's chasing away our customers.
Can we have the Reader's Digest version of this?
This is a real story. This can be checked in the newspaper. John was there. John was there when it happened. So was Bob. So the people say to me, well, do you know any psychics that can help us? I said, yeah, I think so. So I walked around the building, and I walked back in and said to them, it's not on your property. It's on the property across that thing over there. It comes through here, through that cement wall, and bothers your people, and goes back there. And they said, well, what can we do about this? I said, well, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not your property. And they said, well, will you please go over there? Will you please go over there? I said, well, who owns it? They said the Catholic Church owns it. And I go, okay, yeah, this is getting thicker. Well, who lived in the house? Nuns. Oh, no, you must be kidding. So I walked around the thing, went over there. I couldn't even step on the ground without knowing that babies that Father Conklin had impregnated the nuns with were buried in the backyard. So
this is true. This is true.
This is just there's a minor case, one of hundreds. So I walk back, feel it, and I go, yep, it's the truth. And so I say, I'm sorry, I have to turn this into the police, because I have I made a vow, if I'm going to use this for police work, which
I did that before. I helped the Pinellas County Police find a body, and I thought I was being helpful. And then, a couple of weeks later, there's a knock at my door, a little apartment I lived in, and they wanted to ask me questions about how I knew the details of where this body was found. And in that moment, I realized, it's not cool to be clairvoyant.
No,
because people who don't understand it can't fathom how you know these things. But my description of where the body was very detailed. And so even I thought, Well, and so I stopped doing that. I do it privately, but I never do it anymore like that.
Yeah, and it's a horrible thing because
But
when you tell the truth,
used to have a radio show in Detroit where the callers would call in, and was it you and John, or were other people involved in that?
I was involved with half a dozen of those.
Okay.
Some of them were also cable television shows. Yeah.
Look, we have so many stories to tell.
And people would call in and
okay.
say this, and I'd
Yes.
actually literally say, "Wait a second, I'm seeing this. Is it in the basement? Yeah. Is it in the basement on the northeast end of the building? Yes. Are you seeing white balls roll around when you open that door? Yes. Okay, well, here's what you do." And then literally, this would be in the paper. So people would call into this show with their ghost stories, with their whatever, and over the radio, I would literally help them. And in some cases, I would even go there. So I did a lot of house blessings and house clearings.
Yeah,
and
but
so
did you ever find out where Al Capone is buried?
No, but there is that whole story. It's rather interesting.
Yes, actually, they say he was taken at that restaurant there on
I was just gonna say,
Woodward.
we used to eat there.
Over there on
Yeah.
what is that road? 12 Mile?
Right by your
no,
house.
no. Way back,
Telegraph.
15
Telegraph
Maple
and
Road,
15.
15. Yes,
Yeah.
and it's now an Italian restaurant. But a lot of stories like that. Now we can.
But
go
I
on-
have been called to ask if the head of his name isn't Capone. It's the guy who they never found his
Oh yeah,
grave,
I
right?
know.
Which is really funny.
What is his name?
Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah, Hoffa.
So
not Al
I
Capone.
received all kinds of calls because people
Jimmy
thought
Hoffa.
if they could find Jimmy Hoffa's body, there'd be
Right,
money connected
right.
to it and blah, blah, blah. So around here, there were a dozen stories. People
I
would call me
even
up and
looked
say,
in my
oh,
backyard.
people came up and said, psychics told me that Jimmy Hoffa's
Yes.
buried in the cement underneath my driveway. And I'd go, okay, where do you live? La da 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 da. No, that's wrong. And then I did this. I'm sorry to have to say it. I did it a long time for free, but sometimes I would do it. You pay me $100 an hour, and I'll tell you whatever you want. And so I never got ripped off. Everyone always paid me. Why? Because I always delivered, right? So finally, after like 12 different people asking me where, we have it. We know where he is now. And they'd call and I'd say, no, I don't think so. Finally, somebody said, well, then where the heck is he? I said, well, blah, blah, blah. And whatever I said, I guess was the accurate thing. And then about 10 years later, they found him in this situation, found his body, blah,
Look,
blah,
I
blah.
have to clarify. It was Telegraph and Maple.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I said Woodward. All right, that's enough for tonight.
One more thing.
Well, okay, and then wrap it up.
One of the largest mansions in Detroit was held by the highest Catholic person, who I'm not going to mention the name because they are super famous. And this friend of mine, well, everyone knows him. He was a star basketball player for the Pistons. What was his name? I taught his daughter. Ooh, I can't remember now. Anyway, very famous. And I don't want to mention him because he's
very connected. Let's not mention his name.
He's called me out in a group of,
His daughter's name is my name.
Yeah,
Did you remember that?
5,000 people in the audience. And he'll say, you see that guy over there? That's Doug Gabriel. That's the smartest man in the world. And I'd go, oh my God, no. And you see that guy sitting next to him? That's Bobby Hankins. He's the best doctor in the world. We'd get mobbed John Sally. And I taught his daughter.
Yeah.
Well, I knew he was. Anyway, we don't go there.
Okay, come on.
The point is, John Sally buys this house and he's having this big party. And I get a call from him saying, I understand you're the best psychic in the area. My house is possessed and I'm having a party here and somebody needs to do something because I'm telling you, it's terrifying me. It's terrifying everybody. I'm going to have to move out of this house before I even got moved in. And we're having a big party here in a couple of days. I said, oh no, that night. And I said, yeah, I'll come over. And so they said, all the bad stuff is happening in this room. I said, it ain't in this room. I said, well, where is it? And I walked around the house. I said, here it is. Master bedroom in this gigantic closet, way bigger than this room we're in. That's where that Catholic person was raping the little boys. And then he killed one of them. And that's what was in the house. And so I go in and I do this thing. I said, this is very, very serious, John.
So you were acting as an exorcist again at this point? Okay.
Yeah, I was.
The topic is
up until 54, I was still doing this work.
Okay.
All the time. And John knows about some of them, but he doesn't know about a bunch of them because I didn't tell people about some of this. It's too crazy. So John Sally says to me, oh my gosh, you've cleared it? I said, yes, it's clear now. And what we need to do is find out, I will try to find out the name of this child so I can help this child be permanently at peace, because it's the shadow. It's not the child. It is the shell of the child, the astral shell. I had the astral shell go on. Matter of fact, this has happened so many times that people, when they hang themselves in a house, it stays there till someone comes and says, hey, you're dead. You need to move on. And then they do. So then that night, everyone said, okay, will you stay and will you give readings to people? That night, I gave Dennis Archer a reading and told him to run for Detroit
the
mayor.
Former mayor of Detroit. Yes.
And then I told him where there were 2 coffers of money that he could go get the money to run his thing. And I said, but it doesn't matter. What I'm saying to you doesn't matter at all, because it's your wife who tells you what to do. So why don't you ask her to come in? I can feel she's in the other room. He gets her, brings her in, tell her this, and she says, that's it. He ran for Detroit mayor and won.
Okay.
One of the only honest mayors in Detroit ever.
We have a lot of stories to tell, and we're not going to die off anytime soon. So we'll save the next round for the next time we get together.
Well, you started this. Now you're going to have to.
I know.
You're going to have to exercise me from getting all worked up talking about this stuff.
Well, there's some nice warm apple cobbler
Oh,
coming out of the oven.
See, that's how she controls me.
Okay, see y'all later. And if you have any topics that you want us to drill down on, please leave a comment.